When my father passed away, I thought grief would be the worst part, but I was wrong. My brother had other plans. He stole the inheritance, the house, and nearly destroyed our family. But then, I uncovered a hidden secret in Dad's basement that turned everything upside down. This is how I took everything back. When my dad died, I thought the worst was over. I really did. I mean, losing a parent, that kind of grief hits you like a freight train, right? But I had no idea that the real heartbreak, the real betrayal, was still waiting for me just around the corner, and it had my brother's name all over it. Now to give you a bit of context, my name's Michael, I'm 44 years old, divorced, one teenage daughter who I die for, and I was always the black sheep in my family. I wasn't a screw-up or anything, I just wasn't my dad's favorite. That honor belonged to my older brother, James, the golden child, the responsible one, the successful one. He was always the one Dad trusted with everything, the house, the finances, the will, and when Dad got sick and needed someone to help him out, who did he call? Not me, no, it was James who moved back into our childhood home to take care of things, and I didn't fight it. I thought, alright, let him handle it. I'll visit, I'll call, I'll help where I can. But I never imagined how deep James' manipulation ran until it was too damn late. Dad passed in February. It was snowing that morning, I remember, because I drove up from Philly to our hometown in upstate New York in a blizzard just to make it in time to hold his hand at the hospital, and even though his grip was weak, he looked me in the eye and said, "Mike, everything's taken care of, trust your brother." Now I don't know what kind of twisted joke that was, because not 2 weeks after we buried him, James went full shark mode. It started with the will, or rather, the lack of one. Suddenly there was no official will, no lawyer with paperwork, nothing. James claimed Dad never finalized it, and since James had power of attorney near the end, everything defaulted to him: the house, the car, the life insurance, the savings, even the antiques from my grandfather. All of it went straight to James, and when I asked what the hell was going on, he got cold, like ice water in his veins. "Cold," he said. "Dad knew you'd just blow it all. Mike, I'm doing what's best, and I nearly lost it." Blew it? Me? I was the one struggling to put my daughter through high school, working 2 jobs, while he was sitting pretty in the family home with 0 mortgage and a Tesla in the driveway. And that wasn't even the worst part. I found out from our Aunt Linda that there was a will. Dad had it drafted a year before he died, but it vanished, gone from his files, gone from the lawyer's office, like it never existed. And guess who was the last person to visit that office before the lawyer suddenly retired and moved to Florida? Yep, James. But I couldn't prove anything, not yet, and every time I tried to talk to someone about it, they'd say, "Well, James was the caregiver, maybe your dad changed his mind," and I started feeling like I was losing it, like I'd imagined the whole thing. But then something happened that cracked the whole thing wide open. I got a call from Mr. Bentley, our old neighbor. He said he found something weird in his basement. See, our houses were built in the 50s and had these shared crawl spaces between certain lots, mostly sealed off now. But apparently during some renovations, Bentley's contractor found a locked metal box tucked way back in the corner of one, and it had my dad's name etched into it, just a faint engraving, but it was there. So I drove up that weekend, met with Bentley, and we pried it open together. Inside were dozens of old letters, a safety deposit box key, and get this, a photocopy of the original will, signed, dated, notarized, with both our names on it, and it clearly stated that everything was to be split 50-50, but James must have hidden or destroyed the original and stashed this copy away where he thought no one would find it, and I sat there on that basement floor, shaking, heart racing, because suddenly I wasn't crazy, I wasn't the failure, I was the cheated, and I knew then and there I wasn't going to let James get away with this, not without a fight, not without him knowing just how badly he screwed with the wrong brother, because buried secrets don't stay buried forever, especially when you dig deep enough to find what someone tried to erase, and trust me, I was ready to dig even deeper. So I took that box and drove straight back home. No music, no podcasts, just me and my thoughts chewing me alive for 3 straight hours, and when I got home, I didn't even go inside right away. I just sat in the car, gripping that rusted old key in my palm, thinking about how far James had gone, how cold you have to be to steal from your own blood, from your own brother, and from our dad. And the more I thought about it, the more I realized this wasn't just greed, it was personal. James wanted to cut me out, not just because he thought I was reckless, but because he wanted it all: the house, the title of successful son, the legacy, everything. And I'll admit, part of me didn't want to believe it. I mean, this was my brother, we used to play catch in the yard, we shared bunk beds, We fought over cereal and who got to sit in the front seat, and now he's out here stealing inheritances and erasing legal documents like he's in some kind of damn Netflix crime drama. But the thing about secrets, especially the kind built on lies, is they never stay quiet for long. So the next morning, I did two things. First, I took the copy of the will to a lawyer friend of mine named Gina, smart as hell and sharp enough to cut through James' crap like a hot knife through butter. And second, I went to the bank listed on that safety deposit key. Now I didn't even know Dad had another box, but apparently he opened it 20 years ago, never closed it, just paid the renewal fee every year. Like clockwork, and when the manager brought it out and unlocked it in front of me, I swear to God my knees almost buckled. Inside were stacks of letters Dad had written to me, not James, not both of us, just me. He talked about how proud he was, how sorry he felt for not showing it more. He wrote about how he'd been planning to make things right, even said, if James ever tries to shut you out, don't let him, you were always stronger than he thought. And I sat there sobbing like a kid in that little viewing room, while the bank lady pretended she couldn't hear me. And you know what else was in there? The original copy of the will, the one with the lawyer's letterhead and all the legal seals and witness signatures, the real deal. And I knew, right then, James was toast. But it wasn't enough for me just to walk into court and slap him with a lawsuit. No, I wanted him to feel what he did, to see the consequences, to lose the smug grin he wore at Dad's funeral when he acted like king of the castle. So I waited, plotted, gathered evidence. Gina helped me set everything up. We pulled the lawyer's old files from storage, we got testimony from Aunt Linda, we even tracked down the notary who signed the will and got her statement, all of it airtight. And then I made my move. I called James, calm as anything, said I wanted to come up and talk, clear the air, maybe find a way to move forward without dragging things into court, and of course he agreed, thinking I was about to roll over like I always had, thinking he still had control. But I showed up with a manila folder full of truth and a voice recorder in my pocket, sat at the kitchen table where Dad used to drink his morning coffee and watched James squirm while I laid everything out, and at first he laughed, said, "You really think a copy of a will means anything?" But when I pulled out the original, sealed and signed and backed by every piece of evidence we'd gathered, his face dropped, like all the color drained out of him, and I'll never forget what he said next. He leaned back, swallowed hard, and muttered, "I thought he destroyed it," and I leaned in and said, "He did, the one you saw, this one, he kept hidden from you." And the recorder in my pocket caught every single word, every panicked confession, every crack in his golden boy image, and I left that house with more than just proof, I left with power. Finally, after a lifetime of being pushed aside, ignored, underestimated, I had something solid, something he couldn't spin or bury. And that night, when I sat on my couch and played that recording back with my daughter sitting beside me, I felt something I hadn't felt in months, not just vindication, but hope, because the next steps were already in motion, the lawyer, the court filing, the case number, but more than that, the cracks in James' perfect little world were starting to show, and I was just getting started, because now it wasn't just about what he took, it was about everything he never deserved in the first place. And I wasn't about to let him keep it. So we filed. Gina made sure every duck was in a row, every document tight, every witness prepped, and I'll be honest, I was nervous as hell. I'd never sued anyone in my life, and now here I was taking my own brother to court over a stolen inheritance and a forged legacy. But at the same time, I felt something I hadn't in years, like I was standing up for myself, like maybe for once I wasn't the screw-up or the outsider. Maybe I was finally doing something right. The court date came faster than I expected, and it wasn't flashy, no jury or packed courtroom or dramatic music, just a probate judge, 2 lawyers, and me and James sitting on opposite sides of a dull beige room that smelled like mildew and burnt coffee, and he looked like hell, unshaven, tired, twitchy, like someone who just realized the storm he thought he dodged was now sitting on his front lawn with a bullhorn. And when the judge asked to hear both sides, James went first, spinning this whole sob story about how Dad got confused near the end, how I was never around, how he made sacrifices to take care of our father while I lived my own life, and for a second, I almost believed him. He had that same voice he used to use when we were kids and he'd talk his way out of getting grounded, calm, composed, measured. But then Gina stood up and calmly destroyed him. She laid out the timeline, showed the signed original will, introduced the notary's affidavit, quoted from Dad's letters, and when she played the recording, and James' voice came through the speakers admitting he thought the will had been destroyed, the silence in the courtroom was electric. Even the judge raised an eyebrow, and James, well, he turned as pale as the damn table, tried to stammer something about being taken out of context, but it was too late. He knew it. I knew it, and I could see in his eyes that he was starting to spiral, but I didn't feel sorry for him, not one bit, not after what he'd done, not after. The months of silence and gaslighting and watching him parade around like the king of a castle he stole, the judge didn't even need time to deliberate, ruled right there in my favor. The estate would be split as originally intended. James would be ordered to repay any funds he'd pulled from Dad's accounts, and since he'd falsified the will's existence, the court referred it for criminal investigation. I walked out of that courtroom like I was 10 feet tall, and when I stepped into the sunlight, it was like I could finally breathe again. But that wasn't the end, not yet, because 2 days later, I got a letter in the mail, not from James, but from his wife, Erica. Now I hadn't heard from her in years. She never really liked me much, always thought I was the irresponsible little brother who couldn't get his act together. But in this letter, she apologized, said she'd had no idea what James had been up to, that he'd kept everything secret, even from her, and she wanted me to know she and their kids were going to be okay, that she was taking them to her sister's for a while, and that James was dealing with the consequences, which is polite code for his life is in the toilet now. And I know that might sound harsh, but man, I didn't feel glee or revenge or anything like that. What I felt was release, like I could finally let go of the weight I'd been carrying since Dad died, since long before that even. And then, just when I thought it was all over, I got a call from a woman named Natalie. She said she used to work with Dad back in the 80s, and she'd seen an article about the case in the local paper. Apparently they'd published a tiny write-up about the court ruling, and she wanted to meet for coffee. Said she had something of Dad's he'd left with her a long time ago just in case, and now she felt it was time to return it. I didn't know what to think. I mean, at that point I thought every skeleton had already been dragged out of the closet, but curiosity got the better of me, so we met up at this little diner just off the highway, and there she was, maybe in her late 60s, kind eyes, shaking hands, and she slid me this old envelope, yellowed and fragile. Inside was a photograph of me and James's kids, sitting on the porch, and on the back was a note from Dad, scrawled in his uneven handwriting, "If this ever finds you, just know I loved you both." But I feared what love would turn into if I didn't speak up. Forgive each other if you can. The money's never what matters, and I just sat there, staring at it, this tiny scrap of sentiment from a man who struggled so much to say the right things when he was alive, and I thought about James, what he'd done, what he'd lost, and for the first time, I didn't feel angry, I just felt sad, because yeah, I got justice, I got my share, I even got some peace, but in the end, what we really lost was each other, two brothers, torn apart by ego and fear and old scars that never got healed. But I wasn't going to carry the bitterness anymore. I wasn't going to let it poison what I had left, especially not with my daughter, who'd watched me through all of this, seen me fight, seen me cry, and finally seen me win. Because at the end of the day, that's what mattered, showing her that even when people lie, even when they betray you and take what's not theirs, you don't have to become them to beat them, you just have to stay steady, stay strong, and keep digging until the truth sees the light. After that diner meeting with Natalie, something inside me shifted, like all the pieces were finally clicking together in a way they never had before. I took that photo home, showed it to my daughter. She just held it in her hands and smiled a little, said, "Grandpa really did try, didn't he?" And I nodded, because yeah, for all his silence, for all the favoritism and distance, he did try, in his own flawed, stubborn way. He tried to make things right, just not loud enough to stop the train wreck from happening. But I could see now that he left little breadcrumbs behind, like that photo, like the safety deposit box, like the will hidden away in a crawlspace no one would ever think to look. It wasn't that he didn't trust me, it's that he didn't trust James, not fully, and maybe he was too scared to confront that while he was alive. Maybe he hoped James would do the right thing when the time came. But people don't change just because you hope they will, and now that everything was out in the open, I thought I could finally move on. But life has this way of yanking you back in just when you think the final credits are rolling. About a week after the ruling, I was packing up some stuff in the attic, sorting through boxes of old photo albums, dusty trophies, forgotten school projects Dad never threw away, and I came across this faded blue folder tucked behind an old trunk. Now at first I thought it was just junk, maybe an old tax file or warranty paperwork, but when I opened it, my heart stopped. It was filled with old bank statements, but not Dad's, James'. And these weren't recent, they were from nearly 10 years back, showing massive deposits, weird withdrawals, and a bunch of wire transfers to someone named Sia Hampton. The name meant nothing to me, but the dates matched up with the years James was supposedly broke, back when he told everyone he was barely scraping by after losing his job in Boston. And that's when it hit me, this wasn't the first Time James had played people, he'd been hiding money for years, funneling it through shell accounts, probably lying to Dad the whole time, milking his sympathy, maybe even getting Dad to float him some cash while pretending he was struggling. I brought the folder to Gina, asked her if any of it meant anything now that the estate case was over, and she looked it over and said, Mike, this is something else entirely. This could be fraud, tax evasion, even money laundering depending on how deep it goes." And just like that, the storm wasn't over, not even close. I had a decision to make: pursue it and potentially destroy what little was left of my family, or let it go, bury it like Dad buried so many of his regrets. And at first, I honestly leaned toward letting it go. I'd already won the case, already reclaimed what was mine. Dragging James through the mud again felt heavy, like maybe it wasn't worth it. But then I remembered that letter from Erica, remembered the look in her kids' eyes at Dad's funeral, like they didn't know which way was up because their world was built on sand. And I thought about my daughter, and how I'd want her to handle things if it were her one day holding that blue folder. So I made a quiet call to the IRS tip line, gave them everything, didn't put my name on it, just handed it over and walked away. Figured if they found something, they'd do what they needed to do, and I wouldn't have to spend another second chasing James down the rabbit hole, because by then, I was done, truly done. I took my half of the estate, sold off some antiques I didn't care about, kept the house because it meant something to me, cleaned it up, renovated the kitchen, even turned Dad's study into a little music room because that was his passion before life wore him down. And every Saturday night, me and my daughter would sit in there with a couple guitars and just play, no expectations, no stress, just sound and memory. And one night, months later, out of nowhere, I got a text from James: "No, hey, no, have you been?" Just 3 words: "You ruined everything." And I just stared at the screen for a long time, not sure whether to laugh or cry, because he still didn't get it. He thought I ruined something that was already broken. He thought what we had was still worth protecting in the way he wanted. But I didn't respond, didn't feed the fire. I deleted the message and went right back to playing chords with my kid, because at some point you have to decide what you want to carry and what you want to put down. And I was done carrying James' mistakes, his lies, his resentment. I had my own life now, a better one, built on truth, even if that truth came out covered in dust, locked behind crawlspace walls and sealed up in rusty old bank boxes. It was mine, and I'd earned every piece of it. And for the first time since Dad got sick, I felt light, like I wasn't dragging a ghost behind me anymore, like maybe, just maybe, I was finally free. A full year passed after all that, and I'll tell you, it's strange how quiet peace can feel when you've been living in chaos for so long. I'd wake up some mornings still bracing for a fight, expecting a nasty email or some legal notice or another text from James throwing blame like confetti, but there was nothing, not even whispers, just silence. And it took a while for that silence to stop feeling suspicious and start feeling like calm, like something earned, and not just a pause before the next hit. I focused on rebuilding, not just the house but myself. I got closer with my daughter, helped her apply to colleges. We even took a little road trip down to Asheville and stopped at every weird roadside attraction we could find. I got back into music, joined a local open mic group just for fun, started cooking more, sleeping better, laughing more often than I cried. And I know that sounds small, but after everything, those were the victories that mattered. And then one day, out of the blue, I got a letter in the mail, handwritten, no return address, and I knew before I even opened it that it was from James. The handwriting was still that perfect left-slanted cursive he learned from Mom, and for a second I almost tossed it. Thought maybe I didn't need to hear whatever self-pity or accusation he was cooking up now. But something told me to read it, and I'm glad I did. It wasn't long, barely a page, but it was the most honest thing he'd ever given me. He didn't apologize in the usual "sorry you felt that way" kind of way. He actually owned it, said he'd been jealous of me our whole lives, not because I had more, but because I needed less. Said Dad's affection felt like a competition and he thought winning meant taking everything. But now that he'd lost his marriage, his job, and half his family's respect, he realized he hadn't won a damn thing. He ended the letter with, "I don't expect forgiveness. I just wanted to say it wasn't your fault." And I sat there, holding that letter for a long time, not crying, not angry, just still, like part of me had been waiting to hear those words for decades and didn't even know it. I didn't write back, not right away. I needed time, space, and honestly, I wasn't sure what to say. But a few weeks later I mailed him a photo. It was the one Natalie gave me, the one of us as kids on the porch. I didn't include a note, just the picture, because sometimes the past is the only language two people can still speak without shouting. And I don't know what he felt when he opened it, maybe nothing, maybe everything, but that was enough for me. And in that final act, I realized something else. That story, our story, it didn't end in courtrooms or crawl spaces or safety deposit boxes. It ended here, in the quiet, in the forgiveness that didn't need to be loud or perfect, just real. And if you'd told me 2 years ago that I'd ever feel this kind of peace after everything James did, I'd have laughed in your face. But here I am, not angry anymore, not haunted, just grounded, and I think that's what Dad wanted, not revenge or legal victories, but for us to find a way back to ourselves, even if it took going through hell to get there. And maybe that's what healing really is, not forgetting what happened, but choosing to remember it differently, not as the moment everything broke, but as the moment you stopped pretending you were okay, and started becoming someone who actually was. And now when I walk through that old house, when I sit on the porch with my daughter and watch the sunset, when I strum a few chords in the music room and hear her humming along from the kitchen, I don't think about what I lost anymore. I think about what I found, strength I didn't know I had, truth I wasn't supposed to uncover, and peace that no one, not even James, can take from me again. And in a way, that's the real inheritance, not the money or the house or the furniture, but the fact that I came out the other side still whole, still hopeful, and more alive than I've ever been. Thanks for watching. If you liked the story, hit like, subscribe, and stay tuned for more crazy twists. See you in the next one.